I remember as Bernie's campaign wound down, was there was a call with Cardi B shortly after he suspended. And it was got a lot of clicks. It was very popular. And Cardi B was audibly hesitant to endorse Joe Biden. And she was like, I rock with you, Bernie, because I believed in all of these things. I don't see that from Biden. And Bernie, dutifully told her that she should vote for Biden, and she, relented. I remember thinking in that moment, if I could just get to Cardi, there's an enormous power. Like Bernie plays his role. God bless him. I have no problems with him. He's a sitting senator, and he has different obligations than I have as a free agent. But, between Cardi B having such power for politics and such a platform, people like, P. Diddy and Ice Cube, who, if you might disagree with their aspects of their platform or their approach, but the idea that they tried to use their platforms to extract concessions from Joe Biden, I think is laudable. And what would it have looked like if instead of pivoting pretty quickly to vote blue no matter who, we had had a lengthy discussion over the course of the summer as the protests were raging about what Joe Biden would need to do to secure our votes? Do you think, in retrospect, do either of you, regret saying that we should vote for Biden at least as early as we all, as Democrats kind of collectively did? Do you think that there was leverage to be had that was squandered by the kind of immediacy with which, yes, Bernie and everyone else basically committed to voting for Biden because he was worse than he was better than Trump, and that wasn't going to change over the course of the summer and fall?
Yeah, that's a powerful question, and it's a tough call for me because of the fascism at the center of Trump's project. That fascism for me is not just a matter of better or worse. That was what we had between, McCain and somebody else. But when you had a genuine crystallized fascism across the board, Black people have been dealing with fascist zones in the history of American democracy from the very beginning. But when you had a full-fledged fascism taking over the nation state, that's where no matter what, Biden did or didn't do, I had to be part of an anti-fascist coalition, just given my reading of history and given the ways in which fascist dictatorial rule galvanizing the hearts and souls of significant numbers of fellow citizens can become not just unstoppable, but causing to question the very possibility of any kind of democratic politics. So that's why that had a certain kind of weight for me, so that I just knew Biden was going to be a disaster. I didn't even want any kind of concessions. It was a matter of making sure America didn't move toward a fascist project or go off the cliff in the fascist direction. But I mean, in retrospect, I could have been wrong, though, Mr. Briahna. I could have been wrong. I could have read that too intensely, too broadly.
Well, I mean, I know I agree with you, Cornel. And I think, Briahna, the thing that's so smart about your question is this importance about what to do when you feel you need to align yourself, right, with a particular moment for whatever political strategy. What else should we be doing, right? Should that alignment have mandatory additional conversations? Should that alignment have mandatory different spaces where the story about what's still going to happen and what's wrong about what's still going to happen gets fired up, so that our political identities are not shaped by this profoundly limited two-party system at a national level that doesn't begin to capture what we need it to capture. Right. So it's about that alternative space. Right. And my other point about Cardi B, see, to me, this is the contradiction. And I got nothing but love for Cardi B. And I understand the impossible role Black women have in trying to be MCs. It's a ridiculous, limited option. But she's living in basically a commodified male sexual fantasy as an MC. That's basically her profile, which is what is in fact the only profile you can get famous as a Black female MC is. So that is it's a fundamental contradiction when you start talking about what it means to have a kind of political vision. So the moment she goes into that other depth, we're back to the commodification problem from my vantage point about, well, what are the rules for Black women's inclusion in the sexualized commodification of women as a whole? What is the role we have to play? Well, that inclusion, those terms are part of the larger point I was making earlier. So it would have been nice for her to say something, but I think credibility becomes an issue, even though I'm sure she's incredibly smart, because she's so smart. She knew just what she had to do to get where she has to get. That's the question, right? But then we get, I mean, why isn't that the sort of cultural equivalent of a neoliberal move, right?
Well, the thing I think that makes Cardi unique, and frankly, the thing I think that makes both of you unique, is that because you're not political actors, you enjoy a certain degree of freedom that a Bernie Sanders or a squad member, for instance, just don't. Right. You know, I incur a lot of ire online, I think, not because I'm saying anything particularly controversial, but because I was given the imprimatur of, you know, legitimacy by the campaign, having been hired. And yet, unlike most campaign hires, I'm not looking for my next campaign job, and therefore are speaking in the way that a politically independent person does. Right. And there's a lot of power in that, having an independent podcast and being self-financed. And I feel like a responsibility as someone who is independent to take on some of the more controversial, yes, professionally limiting opinions, because who else is going to do it? And that's why I feel as though, I mean, I think we could have a really interesting conversation about, you know, Cardi B and sexuality and the efforts of female rappers to reappropriate the gays and their own sexuality and all of these songs about women enjoying sex, and whether it's a mixed bag in terms of the value of that kind of art. But in the political sphere, I had a lot of respect for Cardi B's willingness to support Bernie in 2016 when it was much less popular.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Absolutely.
And I think that because she is someone who, until recently, was a working class person, she spoke very persuasively and substantively about the issues at play. She is a kind of casual student of political history. I remember an early interview she did in GQ where she rattled off all the presidents and orders and started going on about how much she's in love with FDR, and had a very more cogent understanding of where our social safety net came from than the average American, right?
Right.
And so why not? And this is a question for you both as academics as well. You know, do you feel a responsibility at all to sometimes, and you have manifested this in your live, so I'm kind of answering my own question, but to take on that the space, to occupy the political space that people who are sitting politicians or people who are running for office perhaps can't occupy as easily? And if so, why is so much of the conversation in these academic spaces consumed with the more moderate position? You know, well, should we be saying defund the police? Well, you know, shouldn't we vote for Biden? Who's left to occupy that truly radical space, who's going to have the platform to do so, if not for people like Cardi B, like academics, like myself, people who are genuinely independent.
Absolutely. Briahna, Joy, Greg. That's it. That's true.
I'll tell you, we got to keep Joy in the middle of that name for sure.
Brother Virgil understands. No, I think part of it is that, you see, as the system becomes more corrupt, it generates its own forms of decadence and cowardliness. And the Black middle class accommodation to that system reflects the decadence and the cowardliness in the Black bourgeoisie itself, among the Black elites themselves. And they become the most highly visible when in fact they're driven by careerism. Right. They're driven by opportunism. They're not driven by focusing on the least of these. They're not driven by willingness to sacrifice in struggle. And that's a human thing. That's just not racial, but it gets articulated under white supremacist conditions. So you end up with a Black middle class leadership that does not put at the center Black poor people. It doesn't put at the center Black working people. If there were a mass incarceration system with Black middle class kids going to jail and prison the same rate for Black poor, then all of a sudden among Congress, you'd get prison reform in a second.
Yeah.
Because it's their kids. Yeah. It's their kids. You see, so the class issue becomes so crucial, even as we continue to highlight the white supremacy and the male supremacy and the homophobia and transphobia.
So isn't that then why, if the Black middle class is captured in the ways that I, agree with, isn't that why there's so much onus on, those who aren't participating in that, but do have a platform, people like yourself, people like Cardi.
Absolutely.
I mean, look at what happened to the NBA this year. To me, that was one of the most exciting potential moments for change when they, because they're wealthy people who can afford to go on strike. We don't have to worry about filling their strike fund coffers. They're enormously visible and enormously popular, and they are predominantly Black in a way that is poised to garner sympathy and make them feel. A lot of them are new to their wealth, so they still have feelings of allegiances to their broader working class. Yeah, I mean, there's
most of them come from the poor and working class circumstances. Yeah,
right. So when then we find out that Barack Obama swoops in and convinces them not to, and we get this kind of like deflated version of activism where everyone has, Breonna Taylor's name on their shirt, or, they raise some money. I don't want to completely dismiss what they've done, but I have spoken to, former NBA members who have been frustrated, who really understood the potential energy there. And there have been long-term, players have long, because they are not management, because they work for owners, because there is so much exploitation in that system, really do identify as workers despite their affluence. And there, we see these opportunities that keep getting deflated, but I can't help but think, and you both being such experts on kind of these cultural aspects of American society as well, it seems to me that there's an enormous potential, given how Black culture in particular is put on a pedestal and so prominent in America as cool, and we're tastemakers and music and sports and all these arenas. And we have that independence, that if those people were to feel empowered and like there was a movement that they could belong to, whether it's the People's Movement or P. Diddy's charter or whatever else it is, that would be a real force to contend with in terms of extracting concessions. But whenever any of these people sticks their heads up, suddenly all the Black, media elite come down and say, "Oh, Ice Cube, you're just cooning," and every other kind of thing. I'm not legitimately Black, all of these kinds of things. And that seems to be, the fact that there's such a forceful pushback against those efforts suggests to me that there's a lot of power there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And thus why, they're operating in bad faith, right?
Right. Bad faith. Real bad faith.
You're turning it into a blues song now, Cornel. I mean, I think that, in the case of Cardi B, I think she should have spoken out, and she should have said, "Listen, I'm really hesitant. I don't know what I'm going to do, and here's why I'm hesitant." Right. Yeah. I think, I have issues with Biden and this, that, and the other. I guess I have three thoughts. I've been thinking about this for a long time, back many, many years ago when Snoop Dogg was a really prominent young MC. And there were, around the Rodney King incident, there were a number of people, who were expecting rappers to speak out. Mm-hmm. And my position then is my position now, right? There's a wealth of information if they want to have it. She's doing her reading, but I would recommend that she reach out to people like myself and Dr. West and others to have a safe kind of conversation where you can bat ideas back and forth, because they're surrounded, completely surrounded by corporate interests. Yeah. There's no way she can be making a decision in 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock this afternoon that isn't crafted and controlled and narrated and all the consequences and spreadsheets, worked out to decide what that's going to look like. And I'm not blaming her. That's the reality of that level of success. Yeah. And so to have a place that is more radical, more free, less consequential in terms of career, guaranteed safe, is something I think should happen. I mean, these people are impossible to get to, as you were pointing out. Wouldn't it be nice to talk with them? Right. But part of it is having them believe that there's a body of knowledge and a group of people who have things that might benefit them to know. Well, what would you want to believe that in order for that conversation to happen?
So, assuming that we can access Cardi B, let's pretend that through your podcast or ours and the hordes of listeners who will immediately go to her mentions and say, Cardi B, go on Bad Faith Pod, go on Tightrope Pod, that we can get her in in conversation. What is it that you would want to tell her? What are the historical lessons in particular? This is kind of the question I have always as well. I think people need to feel like if they're going to stick their neck out, that it could be successful, right? That it's not a fool's errand, and they're not going to incur all of the kind of public wrath.
Well, they will. They will
for not. So
but not for naught, but they have to be prepared for that. I mean, that's the bottom line. And that's where the rubber meets the road, Briahna. People don't want to pay that price, especially once they've gotten that famous.
Well, right.
There's too much money and access.
So my question is, though, are there historical precedents we can point to that show that it won't be for naught, right? What examples do we have from people who have been participating in movement politics that can show people, because the narrative is progressive politics don't work, right? The narrative is this is just the way the world is. We're just a capitalist nation, yada yada. We all know that single payer can never ever come to pass.
That's it can't just be a utilitarian argument. It's got to be a moral and spiritual argument as to the kind of person you want to be. You see, when Coltrane was told, don't go to Malcolm X's lecture, and he's there on the second row anyway. When Curtis Mayfield is told, don't write those songs, We a Winner, Mighty, Mighty, Spade and Whitey. No, he's writing them anyway. They won't play them on the radio. He's writing. And when Gil Scott-Heron says, if you quit singing about politics, you can go mainstream. Gil Scott says, no, I'm going anyway. Nina Simone. Nina, if you just go, if you only go to Carnegie Hall and don't sing those political songs, Nina said, no, this is who I am.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? This is who I am. Muhammad Ali the same way. Althea Gibson the same way. John Carlos, Tommy Smith. This is who we are. We are in solidarity with something bigger than just our money, our status, our recognition, the white power structures patting us on the back, making us feel good about ourselves. No, we connected with our grandmamas. We connected with our mamas. We connected with our daddies. We connected with the great ones who came before. Paul Robeson, Harry Belafonte. Those great
Lorraine
examples. Like Lorraine, oh my God, absolutely. Gwendolyn Brooks, Haki Mahabute, all these folk who've paid major costs, Baraka. And I'm talking about Emiri. Now we got a Jumu with Black Alliance for Peace. He's serious brother too. But same with the Black Agenda Report. These are folk who are cutting against the grain. We don't have to agree with everything, but they tied to something more than just what these celebrities are tied to. Right. And that's a moral and a spiritual question. It's not really utilitarian, because as long as you have a utilitarian argument, you always gonna be adjusting yourself to the status quo.